If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, have you ever encountered or heard about sightings of unknown or otherworldly creatures or cryptids like Mothman, crawlers, Wendigos, Dogman, humanoids, etc.? About 2 years ago, I was out on a path that cut through the woods a lot with my longboard. I was out with my friends, but I couldn't get a ride home, so I just went on foot. I was on the path super late, and it was around 2 a.m. when it happened. I was on an uphill, so as I was walking, I knew that a hill was coming up that I could just ride down. All of a sudden I got a horrible feeling, and a second later I heard a weird growling from far behind me. It was a full moon or near full, so I could see pretty well, all things considered. I looked behind me and saw something on all fours. I thought it could be a wolf or something else at first, but then it stood up and was taller than me. At the time, I was 6'2". I instantly knew what it was and ran like hell. Once I was at the top of the hill, I got on my longboard and went as fast as I could, not looking back for a second. My fight or flight response definitely chose the flight option, and I've never gone out there that late again. This happened my sophomore or junior year of high school, so almost 3 years ago. I lived in rural western North Carolina, and I'm the first stop for the bus route, but my bus stop is probably a quarter mile away from my house, as our neighborhood is on a hill with a big private drive that leads up to the houses, and every morning, I would say around 6:50, I would walk out of my driveway and down to the bus stop and wait. It's pitch black down there, by the way, with only my phone flashlight to guide me, and every day I would stand and wait, most of the time listening to music or just looking at my phone. It always felt eerie being in the dark alone like that, but I just have always felt uncomfortable in the dark. But one morning I was walking down the hill as I did. It's a steep, long hill by the way, and I only made it about a quarter of the way down, and I heard a scraping noise almost. It's hard to describe, but the best way I know how to explain it is with nails on sheet metal. Originally, I didn't think much of it and just slowed down a little. And then it happened again. All of this happens within 30 seconds, mind you, and by my instinct, I guess I just stopped in my tracks. My heart started pounding from the noise, making me nervous, and I began to hear loud rustling at the tree line on my left side before something pale white, human-shaped, and maybe deer-sized, ran out of the wood line into the small yard next to me. I turned and ran so fast I didn't get to look long as it triggered my fight or flight response. I ran all the way back up the hill and jumped over every step on my porch and straight into my house, truly fearing for my life and hyperventilating my mind. I'm a large guy, about 5 feet 11 inches, 250 pounds. I don't get spooked easily, but I remember running and letting out a reflexive wail of fear. It's all I could do as I ran, and to this day, I never walk in my neighborhood in the dark. I was scared so bad. I found another way to get to school besides the bus, and shortly after, I got my license. I call it white. It has been seen by me and 2 friends. It is pale white and shiny, like a bike reflector. Its eyes are yellow and shiny. It is humanoid. At first, it was the size of a 4 or 5-year-old, but in a few months, it is now at least 10 feet tall. It lives in the woods. The first time I saw it, it was hiding behind a tractor front bucket that was detached. I glanced at it and saw a small white face with yellow, shiny eyes looking at me with its mouth open like a mouth breather. No offense. I screamed, and my cousin also saw it. My cousin and I went around those woods looking for it. It is ominous but also peaceful there. The reason it is kind of creepy is that I have never seen bugs besides fireflies in there, or birds, for that matter. One time, we found an army man hanging from a tree branch by a single spider thread that felt threatening. The way we normally see it is a few dozen feet into the woods, just as a white silhouette. The second close encounter is this. Cousin A, same as last time, and I had a campfire going. I didn't know because I was grabbing wood, but he went inside to poop. While I was grabbing wood, I thought I saw him crouched in the dark out of the firelight near the firewood stack. It was man-shaped and gray. This might be a different entity. I said, "Come, help me get some wood," and then it ran away while still crouched. Its speed was like a sprint, maybe faster. Later that night, we saw a white figure standing in the woods, looking at us. The scariest and last noteworthy story is this. Once again, we had a campfire. At this point, spotting it has become a game between me, cousin A, and cousin B. We had a flashlight and torch and stood at the edge of the woods looking for it. Someone pointed out a huge white shape, at least 7 high and 6 long. I think it was hunched over because the shape was like that. I pointed my light at it, and it promptly turned towards us. We ran back to the fire at that point. Cowards, I know. Another thing that happened is that we hear footsteps sometimes as well as occasionally get a sense as if being watched. This happened to a friend of mine a few years ago. My friend and I are both gun enthusiasts, and I had just purchased a new gun and wanted to shoot it. I live at the base of a mountain that borders the Blue Ridge Parkway. I own 17 acres, so shooting in my backyard isn't an issue. We began shooting my new gun, and my friend turns to his right and is immediately shocked and says, "Hey man, what that?" When I turned to look, I saw something that sticks with me to this day. It was a red-eyed creature, maybe 2 feet high, with glowing red eyes. I did not get a very good vibe from it, and in my face, I was terrified. Even with a load gun in my hand. We approached the creature slowly, and my feeling of terror rose. My friend and I immediately turned around, went inside, and did not speak about this for the rest of the time. Like we had forgotten about what just happened? My friend called me the next day and asked me why we had not done anything, and we both came to the agreement that this creature had influenced me in some way. If anyone has had a similar experience, please share. As far as looks, numerous people have asked about the description. It was 2 to 3 feet tall, with scaly gray skin, but I was distracted by the eyes. They penetrated through me. It was so intense. Approximately 5 years ago, I was driving home from my job as a correctional officer at Cook County Jail in Chicago, Ill. My shift ended at 11 p.m., and it took me approximately 35 to 45 minutes to drive home from work. As I always did, I would call my wife and let her know I was safe for my shift, and typically she would keep me company on my Bluetooth while I drove home. Every night when I drove home, I took the Midlothian Turnpike, a few blocks out of the exit of the expressway. Midlothian Turnpike will also lead you to the location of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Please research Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. As I drove past Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, a figure flew over my car and across the road into the woods on the other side of the street. I screamed, as I thought I was going to hit something. My wife is still on the phone now, yelling and asking me what is going on and if I am okay. I had to get my bearings together, but I was so scared. I thought about stopping at the gas station ahead, but I knew I was close to home. When I got home, we had a good laugh about it. 2 days ago, I told this story to my boss. He asked if I knew what Mothman was. I heard of it but wasn't familiar with its stories. When I look back now, many things happened that I believe may have been a result of my encounter. I probably won't talk about this again, as I don't expect anyone to believe me, and I don't want to feed it any energy to come back. We live in the middle of a field on almost all sides. There's 40 plus acres before there's even trees, so we are very exposed. The other night, I was going out to my truck to grab something I had forgotten. I park across the driveway between 2 outbuildings, probably 100 or so feet from the house, and there's just one light on a pole and a small one on the garage attached to the house, so not a ton of light unless there's moonlight. Anyway, all was fine until I turned to go back. I saw something large and black move very quickly between 2 vehicles that were parked closer to the house. I didn't give it a second thought because I thought it was one of our dogs since we have a 35 tall black dog. That was until I turned back to the truck I had just been in to see both my dogs standing behind me. My hair rose on my neck as I turned to see my dogs, and at the same time, the large dog, who is a Doberman, also raised all his hair. I gave him the signal to heel and stay with me, and we went to investigate what it was. We have lots of livestock, so I didn't want it to be a predator searching for an easy dinner. We snuck behind the garage where I had seen the creature, only to turn the corner to see a goose. Now we do have 2 pet geese, but I don't think this was our goose. For context, we have African geese, but Canadian geese are the native species. It is still winter here. It snowed just earlier today. I haven't yet seen any spring birds or geese, and we have a huge pond on the property, so the geese are all over our place come spring or summer. This looked like my male goose. It honked at us, and we both, the dog and me, jumped. The dog started to growl at the goose, which was a big red flag for me. That dog loves the geese, our birds are his friends, and he checks on each one every single day. He has never growled at them. It didn't act like him either. The goose is usually not the most friendly and always greets me by flapping his wings with a big honk. This one just politely and softly honked at me. The cherry on top was that, unless my goose is Houdini, he should have been locked up for the night. We turned tail and went to the house. In the morning, my goose was in his house, still locked up and safe. I was pretty sure I started the creature, so he shifted into something that it knew should have been in my yard. It still sends chills down my spine to think about how close it was in my yard, pretending to be my goose. It doesn't seem to have an interest in me or my dogs, thank the stars. Anyone else heard of a creature like this? When I was 14, I was with my friends, and we were walking through a cemetery. Before we started walking, we ordered pizza at my friend's house, which was across from the cemetery. I got hungry and decided I'd sit on a bench and scran some of my food. My friends decided to carry on walking through the cemetery, and when they got pretty far ahead of me, I decided to get up and catch up to them. Walking through the cemetery, with only a shitty phone light to guide me, this tall, easily about 7 to 9 feet tall, skinny white creature ran in front of me. Taken aback, I scanned the area to find nothing around me, but I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched and hearing weird noises. Not wanting to find out what I came across, I legged it, finally catching up to my friends, who, of course, didn't believe me when I told them what happened. What do you think I saw? I've never seen anything like it ever since. My boyfriend and I live in rural northern Michigan. The closest town is about 20 miles away, and the next closest is almost double that. We live right next to a huge national forest, so we have lots and lots of wildlife. On to our story. My boyfriend works nights and has for most of our relationship. Often, I will take him to work and pick him up, so we are on the road a lot at night. One night, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was headed to go get him from the gym after his shift. I had our dogs with me, a 2-year-old Doberman and a 14-year-old Husky. We came around a corner from our neighbors. They have a large pasture with 1 horse in it. Never, in my 4 years, have I ever seen this horse out of his barn past nightfall. He retires to his shed when the light goes away and comes out with it. You can see into his shed as you round the corner. We got to the tree line on the back of the pasture, and I saw it. It looked like a horse. But from the second I saw it, I knew it wasn't the horse. It was 4:30 a.m., and I had just seen him in his shed. All my hair stood up, my heart beat hard, and I got a very weird feeling. I had to brake at the same time as we were approaching a stop sign. I looked over at my Doberman in the passenger seat to see him with all his hair raised and his teeth bared. He let out a guttural growl that I felt in my chest. The only other time I've ever seen him like that was the day his papa was walking around our backyard in the dark and he didn't know he was out there. He is a very docile dog, and it takes a lot to make him weird. I had goosebumps and chills the whole 20 miles to town. Just 3 days ago, my boyfriend was on his way home from work in the gym when he came across the creature too. He said he saw a deer eating some trash that had been knocked over from a trash can at the end of a drive. I didn't think anything of it until the deer stood up on its hind legs and walked across the road into the trees. My boyfriend is an ex-infantry. I have never seen him nervous or rattled by anything in our 4 years together. But he got home, and I knew something was off right away. He had goosebumps, which was the first time I've ever seen him have them. When he told me the story, it gave me goosebumps and the same chill again. I don't want to say the name of the creature I believe it to be. About 2 months ago, there was someone out here blabbing loudly about this creature. We told him to hush before he summoned it, and now here we are. There are many legends and stories about these lands. We live near where the Dogman comes from. Stories of Sasquatch pop up from the elderly now and again. Whatever this creature is, it's awfully close to our house. Now I'm weary of all the wildlife I see around me. Though I'm sure I'll know if it's near again, I will, my boyfriend will, and at least one dog will. The Husky has no senses left, he's far too old and lives in his own world. He's still a healthy boy, though. I'll never forget the chill it sent down my spine or the way it spooked my dog. Let this be a lesson in what you speak into existence. My freshman year of high school, I was going through a negative phase. My mom would describe me as constantly yelling at her and fighting my younger brothers all the time. She said she would pray every day, hoping I would change. She told me she was scared that one day I'd get massively out of control and that she'd have to call the police on me. This happened around the summer of 2011. I just ended my freshman year of high school. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I used to sleep with the door open back then. I randomly woke up and looked at the clock. A few minutes later, I heard faint footsteps. At first, I thought that it was just in my head. After a few minutes, I started to look around, as I usually do whenever I wake up. I heard the footsteps again, but this time they sounded like they were literally outside my room. In my peripheral vision, I noticed that I couldn't see into my brother's room. He also used to sleep with the door open, and his room is across from mine, as if something were standing in front or blocking the entry. I got curious and turned to see what was blocking the entry, and I saw a humanoid figure, about 7 feet tall. It was faceless, bald, and had a fair-skinned complexion. It was dressed old-fashioned. It had a cream-colored sweater with what appeared to be random paint strokes and splashes on it of many colors, and black slacks. It was just standing there, as if looking at me. I started analyzing it. It was abnormally thin and had freakishly long arms way past the knee. It also had visible veins running all over its faceless expression. I thought I was dreaming at first, but I started blinking, shaking my head, and slapping myself in hopes that I was dreaming or hallucinating. I stopped and looked across. It was still standing there. I immediately freaked out when I found out I was not dreaming and pulled the covers over my face. I tried yelling for help, and I couldn't scream at all from the terror. 30 minutes later, I built up courage and pulled the covers off to confront it, and it was gone. I told my mom about it the next day, and she said that ever since I saw that thing, I started to change. I haven't seen it since. My youngest brother also happened to see that thing earlier this year. What do you guys think it could have possibly been? I live in South Wales, UK. Now, admittedly, we aren't known for our cryptids, more known for ghosts, which I don't believe in. I'm a 30M. I live in a remote area, and in the past, I've hunted and eaten rabbits. I no longer do this, as I can't hurt animals anymore. The largest, native, animal we have is the red deer. But, for many years, there have been news articles of large cats in our area, possibly puma or panther, that have grown too large for their owners. I live in an area close to Tonmer, South Wales, and there is a creature sighted frequently called the Beast of Tonmer. A police officer who was a close friend of my family told of an encounter with said beast. However, the creature I encountered that day, when I was 11 years old, was neither a large cat nor a red deer. I had been playing with my cousins. As children who lived in the valley, exploring the trees, forests, rivers, and valleys was the norm. My cousin, who lived barely 2 miles from my house, had asked me to go for a walk and explore as our parents, related in some distant ways, sat, spoke, and ate. My cousin was a lot thinner and more agile than me. While exploring the forests, barely a mile from his home, I had lost sight of him rather quickly. I'm not sure what made me turn to my right. I heard no sound or caught a glimpse in the corner of my eye, but I turned and glanced. There is a tree line, maybe 20 feet from me. There was a creature I could only explain as a dog that was bipedal. Werewolf isn't the word, this was, sure as day, a dog. It was leaning against a tree, using one paw to steady itself. As I looked at it, as we became aware of one another, the creature pushed off from the tree and stood in a way that was terrifying and threatening at the same time, a stance I knew immediately as aggressive, though I can't say why. It was run away or die, even at 11 years old, I knew that. I ran with tears streaming all the way back to my cousin's home. When my younger cousins returned, they scolded me for my imagination getting the better of me. I know what I saw that day. I'm 31 now, and I'll remember the sheer helplessness I felt in the presence of that creature for the rest of my life. The world is a scary place, never underestimate it. The Spotsville monster is the true story of various encounters with big, hairy, seemingly supernatural Bigfoot-like monsters and other strange phenomena in the lonely bottomlands of western Kentucky. The bulk of the work centers on the 11-month ordeal experienced there by the Nunnally family in 1975. The remainder is the result of over 20 years of investigative field research into the area and, in particular, the occupants of Mound Ridge Road from 1935 to present. The story begins in that year with a devout widower and her 2 children residing in a small, isolated farmhouse on Mound Ridge Road. At this time, the area is part of a very small town. But its population is dwindling fast because of a frightening monster said to dwell in the foreboding forests there. After a traumatic encounter, they leave the area as well, and we jump forward to 1975 as the Nunnally family, after several years of unhappy city life, makes their entrance. Eager to return to the relative simplicity of country living, the Nunnally family ignores the warning given them by the current residents and wastes no time moving in. The Nunnallys are a somewhat troubled and unusual family. Red, the husband and father of the 6 young children, is a rough-and-tumble, no-nonsense renegade who suffers from glaucoma. They are, at heart, simple country folk forced to live in the city by a series of strange encounters with the unknown at their previous country home some 3 years earlier. The disturbing memories, forgotten in the hope of a better life, quickly resurface when their farm animals begin to disappear. Enter Roy, a fearless local firefighter and expert tracker/hunter who lives just a short distance away. While hunting in the area one day, he becomes aware of the monster's existence and sets off to warn Nunnallys, thus beginning a lasting friendship with the family. As the encounters with the creature become more intense, and fearing that his friend's failing eyesight might hinder his ability to guard the safety of his family, Roy takes it on himself to track and kill the creature and thus protect Nunnallys and his own 2 children. He is drawn into a series of frightening encounters with the Spotsville monster, which make clear its terrifying, supernatural nature. It can appear and disappear at will. It can walk over freshly turned dirt without leaving tracks, and no bullet of any caliber can harm it. Mutilated animals are found as UFOs glide silently beneath the surface of the nearby Green River. Local authorities, with their own agenda concerning the creature, force Roy to turn over all evidence and give false statements to the media. After an encounter with the monster, which leaves him clinically dead, he somehow manages to survive on his own and succeeds in warning his friend to take his wife and children and flee the area at once. I used to live on Gilmore and Cliff Shadows, basically where Cheyenne meets the 215. There is a small mountain range that is basically my backyard. It's a suburban area with stucco houses crammed so closely together that you can hear your neighbors fart. It was less than a 5-minute walk from my front door to the base of Cheyenne Mountain. I used to run up the ridge to the peak as exercise. I have since moved from the area. This was around September or October of 2017. My fiancé and I loved sitting in our backyard and enjoying the scenery. We had seen some weird, unexplainable stuff on the top of the mountain. Once, we were watching what we thought was a hiker before he ran towards the edge of a cliff and seemingly flew off the edge. This kind of stuff was the other half of why we loved sitting in our backyard and just watching the mountain and the sky. Back to the story. With all the strangeness, this was by far the most unexpected and unexplainable. One night, around 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., we were up late and felt like lying out back and stargazing. We dragged the dog's bed outside and threw a few blankets on top so we could lay on it. It was always windy. We lived at the base of a mountain, so this was a part of life. We also had a flood wash behind our house, with a little running trail, that made our yard even more windy. As we watched the clouds pass under the stars, something large and humanoid glided over us. It looked like a man with wings. It did not flap, just glided over silently. I would say about 3,000 feet up. I am estimating this based on the height of the mountain. I am not sure, but it looked like it was at about the height of the mountain peak, below the clouds, gliding above our house, south, parallel to the mountain ridge. It was silhouetted against the clouds, the city lights barely illuminated it, but I could clearly make out the shape of a man with wings. My original thought was a hang glider, but it was super late at night, and as far as I know, you don't just jump off of random mountains to do this. There are designated flying zones, and you have to log quite a bit of flight hours to be able to fly alone. I also thought of vampires or gargoyles, but again, I have not heard any legends or stories from this area. I have done a bit of research, and my new thought is that someone may have released a flying fox. I looked up videos of them flying, and they seem smaller than what I saw, but maybe someone had one that got too big and they let it loose. I have had friends that have exotic pet birds, cats, or monkeys, so I could see this happening. They seem like they need to flap a lot, though, but I guess if it were higher up, it would not need to so much. It had such a smooth, straight flight path that it gives me doubts. This still seems like the most reasonable explanation. What do you think? The other day, me and my friends were hiking a bit, and just as we were coming out of the forest, my buddy asked, "Did you hear that voice?" And me and him spun right to where it was coming from. His flashlight hit it for maybe 1 second. It looked at least 7 feet tall, had pale grayish skin, and had glowing orange eyes. The moment it saw us look at it, it dropped onto all fours and ran away from us at an insane speed. Despite it leaving, my friends got the duck out of there. Only me and my one friend saw, and my other two didn't look quick enough. However, they believe us because we have seen things like this in the mountains and forest areas we live in for years. We even gave them the goofy nickname Cheesies in an attempt to make them less scary, and we've always thought they may be skinwalkers, but when I found out about Fleshgate, I thought that this may be what we have been encountering for so long. Last weekend, my 5-year-old and I went tent camping in the Uintas northeast of Utah. There was overcast weather. By the time we got done paddleboarding, we made our way back to camp. Once we got back to camp, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. I mostly shrugged it off, thinking I was overthinking the safety of my child. One thing to point out is that there was a trailer and a truck close to us, but I never saw anyone throughout our experience from there. At around 8 p.m., we started our campfire, roasted brats, and ate snacks. During this time, I would think I heard a crack or subtle movement, and I thought it was just the embers popping. Once the sun finally set, I noticed it was completely pitch black outside the reach of our campfire light, most likely due to the overcast weather. At this point, I decided it was time to pack up our food and take it to the car, but I had this sudden feeling that I was being watched, so I decided to turn my headlamp light on. I faced 30 degrees to the right of me. About 40 to 50 feet from us, I see a small bush-like tree. I want to explain that this small bush-like tree was not thick or sturdy enough for something big to lean on or climb onto, and above the tree standing behind it, I see 2 big circle white eyes with a hint of purple staring straight at me. The animal or creature was far enough from the glow of fire that I couldn't see a silhouette of a body, but it was close enough that it was odd behavior, and it was only seconds from us if it ran towards us. My first thought was that it was a bear standing on its hind legs, just curious. It looked to be 8 feet tall or so. As I had my light facing the creature, who was abnormally close to our campsite, I grabbed my kiddo and bear spray and told my kid there's a bear behind a tree and assured him we would be fine. This creature just watched us intently, and suddenly, a few seconds later, my intuition screamed, "Get out now." I then started walking backwards towards my car and told my kid to walk slowly with me. The creature made no movement and tilted its eyes at us as we moved away until my light could no longer reach it. I can't explain this new type of fear I was experiencing. It was unnatural. I think prioritizing my boy's safety allowed me to get us to the car in a much more composed manner. Once in the car, we waited 30 minutes to see if it would come into the campsite to look for food. But nothing happened. I thought perhaps it left and we could sleep in the car to be safe. I decided that I was going to try and grab blankets from the tent, put out the fire, and we could pack out first thing in the morning. I thought wrong. The campsite from the car was about 150 feet away. To the right of us were big trees, and to the left of us was tall grass or brush. I get out of the door and turn my headlamp on. My light shines towards the brush, and laying low in the brush, I see the white eyes again staring up at me. I decided to try and act big and yell out at the creature, but it made a move towards me, which in turn made me jump back into the car in reverse. I tried to shine my car lights towards it but couldn't see anything. I decided to find help. I drove down and found a friendly fellow camper who was happy to help me pack things up to leave. He arrives with a much brighter flashlight in his truck. As I am packing, he sees the eyes and mentions that there are 2 of them. He states they're not moose, deer, or cougars, and if it's a bear, it's really odd behavior, and he doesn't know exactly what they are. I look toward where he is shining his light, and I see a second pair of white eyes. At this point, I am terrified. One of them is standing tall, while the other is lower. This time they are much further back, as if they now know there's a new reach limit to the light devices being used. It wasn't until the lower set of eyes decided to stand up and be much taller than the first one, looking monstrous. This made my new friend very uneasy, and he said, "This has got me on edge, let's just throw everything in your car and leave." The whole time we are packing out, I catch these creatures creating a perimeter around us. They just walked around the campground in circles, waiting for something, it seemed. I tried to think of rational possible theories. But the more I think about it, the more I can't shake the feeling that this could have been a skinwalker or something else. They were too smart, intuitive, bold, and scary, and they didn't act like normal wildlife. Any thoughts on these creatures would mean the world to me. About 7 or 8 years ago, while back home in Omaha, Nebraska, for the summer from college, my wife, a girlfriend at the time, and I were bored one night and drove out into the country to stargaze and get some alone time. We decided to take my car and drive out into the country and head north until we found a good, dark place to park and chill out. About 10 to 15 miles out of town, I was turning down random gravel roads and found a little cul-de-sac that was facing north but was newly paved. It looked like someone had constructed a driveway for a house that hadn't been built yet. There were no other houses around for probably a square mile, mostly just farmland. I turned around in the driveway and pointed my car north, and we sat for a few quiet hours, enjoying each other's company and chatting about life plans. At about 2 a.m., we were pretty tired and decided to head home so our parents didn't freak out. As I stated before, we were parked on an empty, dead-end concrete driveway, perpendicular to a gravel country road that was about 50 feet in front of us. Behind the gravel road was a cornfield, stereotypical of Nebraska, I know, and it was late July or August, so the corn was probably 5 to 6 feet tall. This detail is important. As I go to start my car, I put my key in the ignition and put my hand on the light switch to turn my headlights on. Before I can turn the key, my girlfriend violently jerks my right arm, which scares the shit out of me. I looked at her confusedly, but she was just staring out at the road in front of us with a terrified look on her face. Immediately, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I sat there frozen in fear and confusion. A very tall, white human-like figure was seemingly floating from left to right along the gravel road right in front of us. Since it was very dark and we were in the middle of the country, all we could make out was the silhouette, but we both could see it well enough to tell something strange was there. My brain was doing backflips, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. From our perspective, the figure looked about 7 to 9 feet tall, taller than the corn stalks behind it, and it was moving at an eerily quick speed, faster than walking but not running. There was no gait like a person walking, no head bobbing up and down, no real movement of limbs, it was just floating. My girlfriend described it later that night as a tall, white, Gumby-looking silhouette. We watched it for what was probably about 10 seconds, but it felt like a minute. My hand was still on the knob to turn my headlights on, and I had an internal debate on whether or not I should turn them on to better see what it was or to keep them off and not let whatever this thing was know we were there. It continued drifting to our right until it was out of sight, and I started my car and floored it down the gravel road, heading in the opposite direction. My girlfriend and I barely spoke on the way home, and once we got to my parents' house, we told them what we saw. My girlfriend left the room while I explained it to them because she was so spooked she didn't want to think about it anymore. She spent the night that night because she didn't want to go home alone, but neither of us were able to fall asleep after what we saw. To this day, I am completely mystified by what we saw, and if I hadn't had my wife with me at the time, I would have thought I was hallucinating or going insane. We were both completely sober at the time, and neither of us believed in or thought much about paranormal entities at the time. I have not been able to come up with any sort of rational explanation, and it still bugs me quite a bit. Nothing makes sense in my head other than some strange amorphous spirit or a 7-foot-tall guy in a Yeti costume on a bicycle riding around at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere in the pitch black. Anybody have any type of explanation for what we saw or seen anything similar on the internet or in person? Let me know. During 1999, I worked briefly as a vacuum cleaner salesman. Yes, the job was as terrible as it sounds, which required very late nights as I was often at customers' homes till around 9 p.m. before having to go back to the head office to check out, then drive back home, often not arriving home until 12 or 1 a.m. I was working late this one particular night and was on the home stretch, around 10 minutes from home, when my old, cheap Ford Fiesta started to overheat. I knew the car wouldn't make it home and had no choice other than to pull into a lay-by on top of the big, dark, deserted mountain next to my town. My hometown is literally the last town before there were just mountains and forests for countless miles. As I pulled into the mountain parking area with steam pouring from my engine, this is 100% true, by the way, a white humanoid figure, obviously surprised that a car was pulling into a deserted parking space in the middle of the night, ran directly in front of my headlights as it sprinted from the edge of the clear side of the parking area and into the forest on the other side. It had no clothes, features, genitals, hair, etc., just a white figure with 2 arms and 2 legs that appeared almost luminous and reflective in my lights. To say I shit myself is a bit of an understatement. My eyes popped out of my sockets when it ran in front of me, but then I realized that I was stuck in a dead car in a deserted mountain lying by in the middle of the night with no mobile phone signal, as this was back in the days when mobile phones were just starting to become popular, but large chunks of the country were missing from network coverage. I had no choice but to sit there for around an hour until my car cooled down, as it gave up the ghost pretty much the second I pulled in. So I sat in my car alone, staring directly into the forest, where the thing I saw had run. There was no weapon, no way to contact them anyway to let them know where I was, and no passing traffic to possibly flag me down. During my wait in the car, I obviously started to wonder what I had seen. I knew for a fact that I had actually seen something, and it was not a trick of the light, that much was clear. I discounted sheep, horses, foxes, or any other animal that populated the Welsh mountains, as I was certain it was a 2-legged humanoid creature with roughly human head, body, arms, and leg proportions. The obvious answer would have been that it was some very strange man who, for some reason, was wearing a white entire body stocking, but since we were miles away from the nearest home and I was the only car around, it's highly unlikely that someone would have spent hours walking through thick forests just to hang out at a parking area in the middle of a forest wearing a unitard. Since I could rule out possible animals or humans, I had to consider the alternative, which isn't a nice thing to think about when you are stuck in a broken down car with this creature very possibly still outside. I didn't think it was aliens, as it was too tall compared to the classic look, while any type of apparition or ghost doesn't tend to run away from people when surprised. I'm not sure if there is some kind of Welsh version of a Wendigo, but if I had to categorize the encounter, this would be my number 1 choice. There was always talk of satanic rituals and witches practicing in the forest when I was a kid, and also of illegal bare-knuckle fights where people had been killed and buried there to cover up the crime, but I didn't think much of it at the time and always wrote it off to superstition and rumor. But now I'm not so sure. Eventually, my car cooled down enough for me to limp back home. No one really believed me when I told them what I saw, and they are adamant that it was a sheep, but to this day I will swear that the creature I encountered was something different. I've been in the forest many times since camping, biking, and hiking and have never seen anything like that again, but whenever I go there, I am always aware of the possible presence of the goat man. I grew up in a very rural part of North Carolina, USA. Just as an example of how rural my hometown was, it had around 500 people. There's more land and wood than people. I lived in the town itself, But my two childhood friends, their brothers, lived about 10 minutes outside of town in a little trailer with family members in trailers next door and across the street. I used to go there on weekends when I was young and stay the entire weekend playing Xbox and walking around at night with the two of them. If you were on their front porch looking at the road, their aunt and uncle lived next door to the left and their grandparents to the right. This is where the creepy part begins. This was around my freshman year of high school, so it was about 6, almost 7 years ago. It was late fall or early winter, if I remember correctly, and me and the younger of the two brothers, I'll call him Lee for this story, were walking around his backyard testing out some night vision glasses I had received as a birthday gift. His uncle next door worked on 18-wheeler trucks and had a couple behind the shop behind his trailer, and we walked behind his shop because it was darkest there in the shadow of the building because they had yard lights. It was around 10 p.m. and cloudy. We were about 30 feet from the front of one of the trucks when Lee, who was looking through the NVG, froze in place, looking towards the trucks and woods behind them. A quick side note about my friend, Lee. He was a hard guy. He was crude, big, around 6 feet 5 inches, and wasn't afraid of much. But I'll always remember the fear in his voice when he said, "Can you see that?" I said, "No." "What is it?" He handed me the NVG and said to look beside the truck. I put the NVG to my eyes, and what I saw shocked me. The silhouette of something that looked human but couldn't have been. Its head was right next to the mirrors on the sides of the truck. Meaning it had to have been at least 10 feet tall. Lee asked me, "See it?" I told him I did. There was a moment of silence where we saw it, and I think it saw us, and we were all frozen in fear. After a moment, Lee shouted at it, "Hey!" And it turned and bolted to the back of the truck trailer in probably 2 or 3 bounds and turned the corner, so we ran after it like a couple of doofuses, and when we got to the back of the trailer, we peeked the corner, and all we could see was the tops of the trees being pushed aside. We looked at each other and ran full sprint back to his trailer, and when we came in, Lee's mother told us we were white as ghosts, and we told her what we saw. Her face went dark for a moment before she told us a story about Lee's dad, and here's what she said. One night years before Lee was born, his dad and his dad's brother were coming back from town and were right up the road when something tall and lumbering came out of the woods and ran in front of their truck. They described the same thing. I always loved going into the woods behind my house, but I never, ever set foot in the woods behind Lee's house after that night. I don't know what that thing was, but Lee and I to this day swear by it, and neither of us would go past a certain point in his backyard after sundown. When I was younger, I lived on a giant hill overlooking Sisseton, South Dakota, called Thurston Hill, or the top of the world. Over the course of a month, I kept seeing a giant, tall figure that was darker than the darkness outside. It would knock on my walls and walk on the roof, it would even whistle sometimes. I even saw it peek its head around the house to look at me while I was smoking, or I would see it outside my window. I was once walking down that giant hill, turned around, and it was standing behind me. I ran like a MF. The worst was the feeling it would give. When it was around, all the hope and happiness inside you would just drain out. I was 16. Now that I am 21, I want to figure out what this was. I've looked a lot and can't find anything that matches it exactly except for the tall, dark men that appear on reservations. I was in the middle of one. I was once talking to a 60-year-old homeless lady, and she told me how she saw a tall, dark figure on that hill and how it would haunt her while she slept. It would do the same to me. God gave me awful dreams. When I dreamt, I would see its true form without the darkness around. It was tall, skinny, very old, very gray, and rotten. The best way to explain it is if you see something made of pure evil that doesn't even seem to exist, as in, it just can't exist, but for some reason it does. If anybody knows anything, please share. Also, I wasn't in town, we lived deep in the country. I was thinking it was a Skinwalker or a Wendigo, but I really don't think it was. I think I would have been dead by now. A Mothman encounter. The night was dark and cloudy, with only the faint light of the moon peeking through the thick canopy of trees. As I walked along the deserted road on my way home from the local market, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I was about to break into a run, I heard a rustling in the trees above me. I looked up and gasped in shock as I saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring down at me. The creature that emerged from the shadows was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was tall and lanky, with wings like a moth and a face that was a twisted mix of human and insect. I stood frozen in fear, unable to move, as the creature advanced on me. It hissed and clicked its mandibles, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intelligence. Just when I thought it was going to attack, the being suddenly turned and flew off into the night. I was left shaken and confused, but also strangely exhilarated. I had just had a close encounter with the legendary Mothman, and I knew that my life would never be the same again. This happened around 2009 or 2010. My girlfriend and I had spent the day together, and my friend was dating my girlfriend's best friend, M. So all four of us were spending every day with each other. Me and were sleeping at my house, in my parents' RV, so we could sneak out at night without getting caught. My girlfriend called me and told me that she had taken her mom's car, and she and M were on their way to pick us up. At this point, it was probably around 2:30 p.m. so to avoid any potential noise waking my parents, we told the girls to pick us up down the road from my mom's. We lived just outside of a very small town, down a dirt road surrounded by farm fields and dense woodlands. And I started walking down the road. It's pitch black out, so we can just barely see 5 feet in front of us before it turns to complete darkness. I should probably mention that I was born completely deaf in my right ear, so every time I was walking with someone, they were on my left side, so I could hear them. As we were walking, we were well away from any houses at this point, and I looked to my right, and just barely out of sight, I saw something walking on the other side of the ditch line along the road in the same direction as us. I assumed it was a deer, as that's the only animal in that area that would be large enough for what I saw. We're still walking, and I tried to focus more on what I was looking at, but I could barely make out what looked like 2 long legs, like the back legs of a long-haired deer, and a tall, slender body. That's all I needed to see. I jumped onto R and yelled, "Dude, what the duck is that? It's a ducking monster." R pushed me off of him and yelled back at me, "Get the duck off of me?" And we continued walking as I tried to contain my fear. We get another 2 minutes down the road, and R looks at me and says, "Dude, I'm not going to lie, I saw it too." It took everything in me to not collapse on the ground in a ball of fear and cry. Before I could reply, the girls had turned around the corner onto my road and were finally there to pick us up. I don't know what it was that I saw that night. I haven't seen anything like it. I lived on that road my entire life, and I had never had any experiences like that. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up during the night and made eye contact with a weird humanoid creature that was looking at me through my bedroom window. My room was ground level, and my bed was facing the window. Strangely, I remember choosing to leave my curtains open that night for the first time ever, so whatever it was in full view. When I initially saw it, I was completely dumbfounded and couldn't believe my eyes. I shook my head no, as I was thinking that this could not be really happening, and I pinched myself to make sure that I wasn't dreaming. The creature then frowned. I nodded my head yes and the creature smiled. Again, I shook my head no and it frowned, so I nodded, and it smiled. I may have repeated this a few more times. Whatever it was, it seemed to be greenish in color and had a roundish face, kind of like Yoda. I can't remember all of the details, but I distinctly remember telling myself that this was really happening and not to allow myself to later chalk it up to being a dream. Any idea what this thing was? A year ago, I encountered something in the mountains, so I'm pretty shaken up, and honestly, I don't know how to describe what happened or what I just saw. I swear this story is entirely truthful, and to be honest, I'm kind of hoping some of you can help me make sense of this in a way that doesn't equal monster in a woods. In some context, I live in a small neighborhood on top of a mountain. I am a member of and live on the eastern band of Cherokee Reservation. I'm 22, and I live with my 22-year-old wife and our soon-to-be 3-year-old son. Basically, my cat is outside. I tried to call him in, but some neighborhood dogs that are basically nothing but pests chased him off. These dogs do nothing but kill pets, spread trash throughout the entire neighborhood, and attack people. I chased the dogs off, but my cat took off deep into the woods. We recently lost our other cat to these dogs, so now I'm worried they'll be back and get a hold of my cat. I know my way around the woods, so I grab a machete, flashlight, and head into the woods. Nothing really happens until I hear those dogs further chasing something. I run towards it, worried I'm about to find them ripping my cat apart. As I'm getting closer, I realize the sounds of distress I'm hearing aren't from a cat but from a dog. I quickly flip off my light and get low. I move closer quietly to see what's going on. Now keep in mind that it was, of course, dark, but I swear to God that before my eyes was a very thin creature reminiscent of a pumpkin head from those old horror movies. There was something like tentacles, or, honestly, I don't know, and this thing was using its hands and tentacles to just tear into this poor dog. The entire time, it was making this noise like a creaking door. I crept away as far as I could, threw up, then ran home. I locked up the house, came to the bedroom where my son and wife are sleeping, and watched the doors till the sun came up. This happened a few years ago when me and my friends were in our junior year of high school, around 2018. There is a DAO/National Forest area northwest of our small western CO hometown that used to be Ute land before the Meeker massacre happened and the natives were forced from the land. Being teenagers, we would frequent this area in our trucks to have bonfires, shoot targets, drink, smoke, fornicate, etc. without having to worry about law enforcement crashing our party. One night, we were having a small bonfire with a group of 4 of my close friends. It was a pretty quiet night. I had picked everyone up in my pickup truck, so it was the only vehicle available, and the road to the clearing was a bit treacherous, so we had to be very careful not to get stuck in the mud or trees. Throughout the night, we kept hearing what sounded somewhat like an owl, but almost like someone impersonating an owl. On top of that, owls are fairly rare in this part of Colorado. It's a very dry climate that's more home to vultures and mountain lions. We heard the noise around 5 times throughout a 1-hour span, and it quickly devolved from an ooh-ooh to just a singular ooh noise, similar to a gorilla sound. At this point, we were concerned, and one of my buddies taunted whatever was making the noise by repeating it back into the tree line. At this point, the sound was immediately repeated, much louder than before, as if it were just behind the tree line. We shit ourselves, and everyone scrambled to the truck. I hauled as much as possible back to the main road. The main road was still washboard gravel, so I tried my best to channel my inner rally car driver to get us the hell out of there. On the drive down the mountain, one of my friends was riding a shotgun, and the rest were sitting in bed, facing backwards. As we rounded a curve, chaos ensued. I heard screaming from the bed of the truck, and my friend sitting shotgun nearly shit herself about whatever the hell was happening back there. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes and looked in the rearview. I didn't get a good look, but I can only describe it as a skinny, hairy, humanoid creature with an arched back sprinting across the road behind the truck on all 4s. There was no coordination to its movement. I barely had time to process before I was being screamed at to hit the gas. We finally got off the mountain, and my friends in the back of the truck appeared shell-shocked. I asked them if they saw what I saw, and they refused to answer, only saying, "Get us the duck out of here." It was only afterwards, when we were at our friend's house, that they felt comfortable talking about what they saw, and everyone described it the same way. All 4s, fast as hell, and humanoid. 2 of the 3 described it as having long creepy-ass fingers, eyes locked on the truck as it crossed the road. They say they saw trees and bushes moving as we drove down, as if they were trying to catch up to us, 4 years later, and this story still makes my hair stand on end when I tell it. In addition, other weird things began to happen in that forest after nightfall. We personally encountered a goat that had been killed by something, feet straight up in the air, stomach slashed in 6 equal cuts, and head nowhere to be found. I moved out of this town 3 years ago, but whenever I come to visit, it creeps me out. I refuse to enter that area after dark, even towards sunset. Let me know what you guys think. I've never actually seen them, but I've had 3 Sasquatch run encounters along the Altamaha River in Georgia. The first time was the craziest. It started with hearing a human whispering and footstep approaching off in the woods, which turned into a very human lock as they closed in. At first, I thought for sure it was some rednecks just ducking with us, but when they got in really close and the howling started, it was an inhuman howl, and they were smashing branches and making a ruckus, like dipping down tree-type branches. We got the duck out of there. Another time, they just got in close and started howling and smashing branches. We stood our ground, shouted back, and fired a few rounds into the air. It left, but we still got pretty damn close. Another time was just the howling in the not too far distance. I never saw them, but I'll never forget that laughter-tuned howl combined with the crashing of large branches. Something was out there, I'll never really know what, but it was big and close. It nearly sounded human at first, but then that howl was a noise that couldn't have been a person. In 2016, I was homeless in Santa Rosa, California. Leading up to this event, a lot of weird things were happening. Mostly just other homeless people I encountered that I just chalked up to them being either on meth or crazy. But after a few weeks, the frequency of these encounters and the theme just didn't sit right with me. So, one night I'm sitting on a bench in a place called Cancer Park. It's a pretty nice October night. In this park, there are big Douglas fir trees. So I'm sitting there, and I look up at one of the trees. What I saw I can't really classify, but if I had to, I'd say a demon, maybe? It was basically made out of the tree, which was about 50 feet tall. What I can remember is that it had a head-shaped shape, like E.T. or Johnny Five. It had glowing gold eyes and was green, like the tree. The weirdest part was when it lifted up a hand and did that thing where someone cranks their fist while slowly raising a middle finger. You know that corny thing you'd do as a middle schooler, like fishing with your middle finger? So I just sat there, kind of dumbfounded, looking at this giant tree demon flicking me off. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes, just kind of giggling to myself. I wasn't really scared, I was just more shocked. As soon as it appeared, it disappeared, and the tree just looked like a tree. During this time, I saw another thing in a tree. It was like a dead mariachi guitarist again, made out of the tree. Something came to mind, the dead mariachi had been murdered either right where that tree was or nearby. I don't know why it just popped into my head. When I saw the first tree demon, I got the thought of a guy at some kind of meeting hall being ganged up on and, like, vigilante justice being served for something he did. I saw a few other odd things during this time. A sort of electric panther running down a hill. A weeping Mexican woman made out of rocks. I saw a friend sitting by a bridge at night say hi, and as I got closer, no one was there. If you ever go to Santa Rosa, look around, and I bet you'll see something weird if you're there long enough. I've always been a night owl, and my current profession actually entails being up all night, so the dark doesn't bug me, and I have pretty excellent night vision. I don't panic. I'm a medical professional and a bit of an outdoorsman. I'm a big dude, 6'2", 260, and a biology nerd. The first encounter I had was on October 22, 2005, on a stretch of back road in the Mojave Desert in the vicinity of Joshua Tree and Yucca Valley, California. It was the third or so day of quail season, and I was all tagged up and ready to go hunting. I had a little Jack Russell Terrier named Gus that a friend let me borrow for the day since I can't own dogs or cats, allergic as all hell. I drove out and parked my Jeep on a turnout at a dirt road intersection. There are a zillion dirt roads out there, and some of the bigger ones actually have stop signs at the intersections. It was a good day, and I was getting a little late, but I hadn't hit my bag limit yet. I decided that I would stay out a bit past sundown to try and bag the last few birds on my permit. I was dressed pretty warmly, and Gus didn't seem to mind, so away we went. By the time I hit my bag limit, the sun had been over the horizon for about an hour. Getting back to the road was easy enough, and following it back to the Jeep was as well. Around the time full twilight set in, I came to an intersection with stop signs in both directions and was getting my bearings when Gus froze mid-trot and immediately started growling with his hackles up. He was a pretty chill dog, so watching him go from a happy little derp to DEFCON 1 so fast was alarming on its own. I scanned the area to see what he might be upset about, because my first guess was javelina, wild pigs, and all I had was a shotgun loaded with bird rounds. As I said, these were dirt roads. Each road is roughly the same width as an average 2-lane city street. On the corner opposite the one we were on, I spotted a creature moving with the same general gait as a rooster but without bobbing its head. What initially clued me in that it wasn't a chicken was the simple fact that, from head to foot, it must have been close to 3 feet tall. Based on body mass, I'd estimate that it weighed about 40 to 50 pounds. I tied Gus' leash to my belt so he wouldn't bolt after it, and I waited for it to wander off. It loitered on the corner for a minute, then without making so much of a flutter, it made a roughly 9-foot standing leap from the ground to perch atop the stop sign. Definitely not a chicken. At this point, I decided it was prudent to be armed, so I popped 2 fresh shells in my shotgun and held it at the ready. When I looked back up, I saw its eyes. The 2 things that immediately sprang to mind, this is where the biology geek comes in, were that 1, they were forward-facing, meaning this animal was likely predatory, and 2, they were proportionally enormous, meaning it was likely fully nocturnal. I realized that a 3-foot-tall, predatory, nocturnal, 40-pound animal that can make a 9-foot standing leap was now approaching me from a high perch, albeit from roughly 40 feet away, and that I was in a bad position. I leveled my shotgun and unloaded both barrels at it. After the echoes died down, it was still perched at the top of the stop sign, but making odd chirrup noises that sounded a lot like sneezing. I was reloading when it jumped down from the stop sign and ran away from us through the brush on the adjacent corner. I finished reloading, waited until Gus calmed down, and jogged back to the Jeep. On the way back through, I hit my trail lights at the intersection where this had happened and saw that the stop sign had definitely been peppered well with shots and that the majority of it had been centered on the animal. This animal had taken a 9-foot standing leap soundlessly, perched perfectly on a 2 inches square area, taken 2 12-gauge loads of birdshot center mass, and sneezed at me. On the way out of town, I told the story to the Spanish-speaking clerk at a local gas station, who laughed and told his coworker, "You hear that? This Garo just ran into El Chupacabra." This happened just this past summer. My family and I spent a week in the New Mexico/Arizona area, visiting various old settlements and small desert towns. It was a great week, except for this one incident during the night. Now, for quick background, I have family who live in western Kansas, so I know what coyotes and various other rural predators sound like and how they act. I am also a large percent Cherokee native and have spent a lot of time educating myself about the various folklore of native tribes, including Wendigos and Skinwalkers. We'd been staying in an Airbnb, and I had a high window in my room. I kept it mostly closed, it just barely cracked with a bug screen in place. It got cold at night, and the house's AC wasn't the best, so it kept my room cool like I preferred. I'd heard coyotes the previous few nights, and I wasn't surprised to hear them start up again that night. They sounded a little closer, but this house was outside town, so I didn't think much of it. Up until I actually started listening to the calls. They sounded off, like someone had recorded them and was now playing them through subpar speakers, and they trailed off kind of like toys when the battery was running low. It took a few calls for me to realize what was happening. These weren't coyotes, I was certain of that now. New Mexico is in the range where skinwalkers can be found, and I'm quite sure that what caught my heart that night was a handful of skinwalkers calling, trying to lure out some dinner. I'm glad that we'd gotten home early that night, and everyone was in the house with all the doors locked. I closed my window and locked it that night, not wanting to take any chances with a skinwalker trying to get in. I'm not lucky or, more accurately, unlucky enough to have actually seen these things, but just hearing them was too close for comfort. I have now had multiple encounters in the same area with the same friends. Last night, my two friends and I went out by Mount Rainier. We headed out around 6:30 p.m. and arrived at the location where we normally go looking for Sasquatch, only to find people camping there. So we headed out of there to another spot we had been. This other spot has had recent logging activity and is a muddy mess. We reach a point on the road where there are two branches shoved into the mud, blocking the road. The road was bad here, and that was really creepy, so we didn't continue all the way to the end of the road as we had before. Where we had come to a stop, there is another road off of that goes to the right. So we decided, let's see where this takes us and look for a place to have a campfire. Eventually, the road dead ends, so we got turned around, facing out, and made a fire pit. We got out the camping chairs and started a campfire. We did a few call blasts and just waited to see if we would hear anything back, and nothing. So we just hung out and were beginning to think this was going to be a bust, and we wouldn't hear any vocalizations or tree knocks of any kind. So we decided to walk down the road from where we had come. We went far enough to be out of sight, and my buddy did some swoops, and we kept walking, stopped, and listened. All of a sudden I hear what to me sounded like a squirrel barking off to my left as we are facing the wood line. This was followed by what I can only describe as an almost eagle-like screeching or falcon sound that turned into this robotic sound. I don't know, I have no explanation. It sounded almost otherworldly, and accompanying it, what sounded like coyote. But they were close, and by close, I mean 15 to 20 yards from us, and coming towards us. There were at least 4 different things sounding off in unison, like a chorus. We were all instantly gripped with overwhelming fear, as none of us have ever heard anything like this. Everything about them was off-putting and intimidating. Since when do robotic demented birds, squirrels, and coyotes hang out together, coming in on people and making these sounds? We began to back away and make our way back to the vehicle and campsite we had made. We were all just at a loss for words. Do we go back and try again? Are we being warned off? We erred on the side of caution and headed back towards the location, never losing sight of the car or camp, unlike the last time. Only until we can see around the bend where we were just standing when we first heard these sounds. We walk over there, and we are listening intently and hearing nothing. Only dead silence, never a sound from the time we got there until that vocal chorus, I'll call it. Every time I am here. We are now stopped and shining our flashlights in that direction down the road when my friend says he sees eye shine and it's peeking around a tree and back out again. I shine my light in the same spot, and that's when I spot it as well. It is peeking from the right side and then the left side. The eye shine wasn't like a dog, cat, or deer, it was just reflecting the light, and the eyes were white like our lights. There are 2 trees, I would say we're about 5 feet apart, and their upward angle from the ground resembles a V. As we are looking for the shine, I take notice of just how dark it is between these trees, like black hole dark, and that's when I began to tell that what I am seeing is a huge black mass. With the lights shining on it, there was nothing lighting in the space between and behind these 2 trees. But if you pan to other trees, you can clearly see the space behind them and between them. I know I have heard this before in other encounters, and I'm going to repeat it as it is the only way I can describe it. It was as though this thing was absorbing our light. I pointed this out, and we are all looking at this thing. So we decided, let's kill our lights and count backward from 3. 3, 2, 1 and shine the light, and the mass has shifted slightly to the right, and now we can just fill the small space between it and the tree to the left, and behind it is a tree with lighter colored bark. Just 3 seconds ago, you could see nothing, and now we see this. That's when you notice that tree blackout reappear. Blackout and reappear. This mass was rocking left to right, left to right. Oh shit. We are all thinking the same thing at this point. That is a Sasquatch, and it's rocking left to right and is going to charge us if we don't back away. We back away slowly and as fast as we can safely. The trees that he was standing by were around the bend in the same exact location we had just been standing at the moment we had heard those vocalizations. Couldn't he definitely? I know this because there was cut down tree sticking up on side of road parallel to where we were looking at it. That side of the road is a downhill descent, and the other side is almost a vertical ascent, and this road is in between. The eyeshine was at least 5 feet up, as was the shoulder, because you could see an arm coming down from that area. I could definitely see that as it was rocking side to side. What's important to note is that the ground those trees are coming up from is 3 to 4 feet below the road level. So that would put those eyes around 8 feet away. This thing was 4 to 5 feet wide and 8 feet tall, and it was darker than a moonless night. We hung out at the campfire a while longer while shining the light from where we were to where we were when we saw it. That is when we spot the eyeshine a lot lower and the black mass behind the brush as if it were on all fours watching us. Then it was as if it dropped down to its belly, and we couldn't see it anymore. But you could see the dark mass sticking out to the left and right of the brush, just really low to the ground. This thing has made its way towards us and is too close now. We shut off the lights again and turned them back on, and the mass is gone, as well as any more eyeshine. Just gone. I never heard a single sound as this thing moved in on us, either when it or they, assuming there were more than one based on vocals, left. There were no roads above or below us, and not another soul was out there. After that, we hung around a while longer, packed up, called it a night, and headed home. I'm going to be getting night vision and thermals soon, as well as a digital recorder to capture future encounters. I was sitting in a park with my girlfriend at the time. At around 1 a.m., a 7 or 8 foot tall figure with a bright white head with no facial features and hands as bright as white got its hands to the top of the gate of the park, turned its head, and started looking in our direction. We froze, and a shiver went up and down our spines until it took its hands off the fence, walked backwards while still looking at us, and disappeared behind a car. We decided to leave the park in the same direction it went and heard a car alarm going off, but we could not work out what car was making the noise or what direction the sound was coming from and made our way swiftly home. The whiteness of its head and hands seemed impossible and was not glowing. There's also no light that could have been shining on it. What the hell did we witness? This is a true story. Has anyone seen? When I was 12 years old, my 15-year-old brother and I experienced a very horrific event while at our grandparents' cabin. My grandparents own a cabin on a rather large island in southern Sweden, which contains only 2 cabins, separated by slightly less than a mile. One summer, my brother and I, along with my mother and sister, went to visit them for a weekend. The thing we did most during our days there was go fishing, mostly angling. On the first day of our stay, we were planning to fish. We set everything up, and all we had to do now was dig for worms, which were used for bait. Grabbing a shovel along with a bucket, we went to the back of the cabin, down a short slope, and through a trail, where we usually find plenty of worms. The forest is very dense, and barely any light shines through, which makes the whole setting a bit unnerving for me, as I have always been easily frightened. I hear something walking, and I look at my brother with a very scared face. He brushes it off as if there was nothing to be afraid of and insists that we go check it out. We walk a bit further down the trail, which I know leads to an open meadow, as I have been there looking for mushrooms with my mom on previous occasions. Before we get to the door, my brother holds up his hands as an indication for me to stop. I looked over his shoulder and saw behind the trees what appeared to be a moose, looking directly at us. I got relieved, as I knew they were friendly and as I had seen plenty of moose nearby. My brother, however, who has never been scared of anything, looks back at me with the biggest eyes I've ever seen and the most pale I've ever seen someone, as he tells me that we should get out of here. Without questioning him, I start to walk back while he keeps pushing me to make me move quicker, and as we reach the cabin, we are pretty much running. My mom and grandma are sitting on the porch as we get to the front, and I tell them that we saw a moose. My brother, on the other hand, remains completely silent. It is safe to say that there was no fishing that day. The following day, we don't even bring up fishing. I'm sitting on the porch reading a magazine, and my brother is sitting inside on the couch doing the same, although he still has that scared look in his eyes. I spend the following hour or two reading several magazines, until my grandpa asks me where the shovel is. I realize that we left it where we were looking for worms the previous day, and I tell him where it is. Just as he is about to go get it, my mother tells me that my brother and I have to go get it since we left it there. She also tells me that we should dig up some worms, as she wants us to go fishing later in the day. I don't question it, but my brother seems unnerved by it. This made everything all the more unsettling for me, as my brother is not easily scared at all, pretty much the opposite of me. We put on our shoes, head to the back of the cabin, and walk down the trail, heading for where the shovel and bucket are. Once we are about 10 feet from where the shovel is, my brother stops and tells me I should go and dig, as he did it the last time. I do as he says, and I start digging for worms. I have this very strong feeling that he stayed back because he was scared something would happen. I start hearing the bushes around me sway, and I hear sneaky footsteps moving closer and closer. Everything is all the more creepy, as I have no idea where the footsteps are coming from. 1 second, I'm sure they're coming from my right, and the next, it feels like they are coming from the completely opposite direction. I quickly put the few worms I found in the bucket, and as I fumble to pick up the shovel, I feel like I'm being watched. My brother walks up to me and helps me seal the bucket, and I tell him it feels like someone is watching, to which he responds that we should leave. Just as we turn around and are ready to head back, I hear a crack behind me and turn around. I look down the trail and see the moose once again, peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked very different from what they usually look like, as it felt much more slim and sort of twisted. At the time, I am more confused and curious than scared, and my brother is dead silent. I can't quite see the whole body of it, but I know that something is wrong. I stand for a couple more seconds watching it, as it is staring right at us. From what I can see, I realize that it is not standing on 4 legs. It is leaned forward, like an old man with a really bad posture, with his arms hanging straight down. I also had this weird sensation that the creature was trying to talk to me, saying, "Let me help you." In a few seconds, I get struck with a panic and start walking really fast back to the cabin, with my brother doing the same. It only takes a second before we are both in full sprint, running back, and I don't look back until we have reached the cabin. I turn around, and the moose-like creature is nowhere to be seen. We put the shovel by the shed where we took it and brought the bucket with worms to the front, where my mom and our grandparents are sunbathing. The day goes on as if nothing had happened, and we don't speak of it at all. Since this happened, I have never brought it up again with my brother. We both just sort of knew that it would feel wrong to speak about it, and none of us have visited my grandparents at the cabin since. To this day, I am not sure at all what I saw. I mentioned it to my friend once, and he told me that if what I said was true, then it was probably a Wendigo. He showed me some pictures from the internet, and I instantly found resemblances to the creature that I saw back then. My grandmother's backyard is in Corinth, Mississippi. This sighting occurred when I was around the age of 8 to 11, and to my knowledge, this is the first and only sighting I've had, although I've seen and heard many odd things in the woods throughout my life: footprints, out-of-place noises, odd placement of natural debris, etc. Me and my friend, we'll call him D, who lived across from my grandmother, were playing in the backyard while my uncle was working in his shop. We were playing some sort of game, from what I can remember, and then, for some reason, I looked in the direction of the forest behind the house. To give some idea of the layout of the property, the house sits roughly 15 to 20 feet from the main road. There are about 5 other houses along this stretch of road, and then the forest pretty much surrounds the properties and main road. If you know the Corinth/Alcorn area, then you can get a rough idea of what I mean. The backyard is fairly large, I'd say about 2.5 acres, and starting from the back of the house, the land dips down into a sort of small, circular valley, with many small trees and shrubs enveloping the center of it. My uncle had an ATV trail going around the base of the valley, which is probably overgrown now. Going beyond the base of the valley, the land ascends, forming a semi-steep hill that immediately leads to the forest. Anyway, as I'm looking towards the forest, I can see movement in the distance. This movement, from a rough estimate, was about 60 to 75 feet away, and at the time my vision wasn't the best, so I asked D if I could borrow his glasses, and when I looked through them, I saw what had caught my attention. I was a huge believer in Sasquatch back then. My belief has sort of mellowed out over time, but this was either the creature itself or an escaped gorilla from a zoo, and to my knowledge, there are no zoos anywhere near my grandmother's house. This thing was massive, and I could make out the muscular features and color. It had been walking on all fours, back towards D and me, up the hill into the forest on the opposite side of the small valley, with the brush right in between us. It was mostly black, but the way the sun was shining on its fur made it look brownish. This couldn't have been a black bear, as the head was cone-shaped and I could make out the shoulders and back muscles, very much resembling a primate. It was probably in the clearing for about 15 seconds until it disappeared into the woods. I remember us both being frightened yet excited that we more than likely got to witness this creature. The stories my grandmother told me of hearing sounds out in the woods made much more sense to me after that day. She figured they were just panthers or bobcats, which honestly could be the case, however, you can never be too sure. I've told very few people about this sighting so as not to be labeled as crazy or an over-imaginative child, but what are the odds of two people seeing the same thing if it's just my imagination? And yes, I do have my doubts occasionally about this event, but I like to believe what I saw was, in fact, a Sasquatch. In the late summer or fall of 2009, there was a horrible animal that has never been identified officially that was terrorizing the South Church/Kagi/Sourdough area. The first time I heard of it was from my parents, who live near the library. Their dogs wouldn't go outside one night and just whined, but just whimpered when they opened the door. My mom heard it first, a guttural snarling, yelping, almost roaring, coming from the top of Pete's Hill. Completely terrifying, and nothing she had ever heard in 40 years living here and growing up on ranches in Mountain CO. They figured it must be a rabid fox or coyote, so they kept the dogs inside. At the time, I was living with some roommates off Ice Pond Road, up against the base of Pete's Hill on Church, a couple blocks away. I got a text from my mom around 9 a few nights later asking if I could hear it. "It's back again. It's headed your way." I went outside, and I could hear it snarling, roaring, and yipping in the distance. It was moving fast. From the time she heard it by Lindley Park to the time it passed above my house, it was no more than 1 minute. It continued along and down a spur trail that cuts down and across the church by Martell Construction, making that horrible noise the whole time. I'll add that every dog in the neighborhood, inside and out, was losing their minds. Over the next 2 weeks, we heard it on multiple other nights. Myself, 3 roommates, and a handful of friends all heard it running around making horrible noises, and as my roommate put it, beating the shit out of dogs. We heard it fight at least 3 dogs, one of which sounded like it was being slaughtered. On several nights, we could hear it moving up and down Bozeman Creek, smashing through brush and snarling. It was honestly terrifying. Neighbors and several people reported it to animal control over those 2 or so weeks, and at least 1 dog was severely injured, I believe over by Kagi and South Ruse/Fairway Drive. If anyone can find the Chronicle article or police report, please share. This all culminated on one crazy night when a group of us were grilling and drinking in our yard. It was about 8 or 9 when you could hear the bastard start its rounds to the south, moving from the Snob Knob down to the creek and the open spaces behind and along Martell/Black Robin Farm. It was on a tier. A group of people who lived in a party house on the corner of the Ice Pond and Church heard it too, and as it got closer, you could hear a lot of people crashing around, swearing, and yelling for dogs to get inside. A few of our crew took note and went inside as well. It had never been so close, 50 yards or so, and it was loud, unlike any of us had ever heard. I've never seen a group of tough Montana kids look more frightened. The beast continued on down the creek, north toward Bogart Park, and faded away. For about an hour, we heard nothing more, so everyone but 3 of us headed downtown to the bars. One roommate, myself, and our friend continued sitting outside bullshitting at the house for a while when our tormentor finally returned. This time it was still in the creek but moving south. It stopped down in the creek across the street and was just tearing the SHT out of everything. Branches are breaking, and stuff is crashing. It sounded huge and pissed off like a rage-drunk moose. Earlier in the night, we grabbed a couple long guns and put them behind the door in case. I had had it at that point and grabbed a 12 gauge, heading through a little apartment driveway on the east side of the street. I had to know what it was. I was only 20 yards from my yard when something came crashing from an old abandoned house across the street, heading right for me. It caught me off guard as I tried to get up, swearing and spinning around. I may have slightly pissed myself off. To my enormous relief, 2 dogs came flying out of the bushes across the road, headed right for me, with such a look in their eyes that hell itself was hot on their tails. Being well acquainted with generations of cowardly dogs, I fully expected a bear on their heels as they blew right past me and ran up onto Pete's Hill. I called for them, but they were gone. I did not see the thing at that point, and it never came across the street light, but I could see brush and branches moving, so I retreated back to the house as it continued raging behind our neighbor's house. My roommate at this point was completely freaked out, and he and our friend were in the doorway of the house waving for me to get back inside. It was at that moment that I heard the thing come out of the bushes and the sound of fast slapping paws on pavement. I spun around to see a large, canine-looking animal running past the house at around 30 miles per hour. It ran with a lope, not flat like a cat and not bounding like a dog or wolf. At its front shoulder, it was nearly the height of a large gray wolf, sloping down slightly at an angle. Its head was massive and looked more like a bear, or, to be honest, a hyena. It was a brown/tannish color with thick fur. I still get the woogs when I think about it. We never saw it again and only heard it once or twice after that. That same night, we heard several gunshots fired by Kagi. We figured someone shot it, but but then we did hear it again after that, so maybe it survived. It was back in February of 2007 in Miami County, Indiana. Not too far from US 31 and US 24. I worked overnights at a warehouse. We had gotten let off work a little early as it was our Friday and our boss wanted to leave early, and I was following a coworker down the road, and I noticed he swerved off to the right side of the road and swerved back on the road and kept going. I assumed maybe he wasn't paying attention or something ran out in front of him, but as I got closer, I could see a very tall black figure walking in the middle of the roadway. I too had to swerve, but I basically came to a full stop as the thing walked next to my driver's window. I never saw a head on it, and I didn't even see any arms. It looked like a large person wrapped up in a black blanket or cloak. Its movements when I first saw them in the headlights were not like any sort of person or animal that I've recognized. I relate it to flapping in the wind like those blow-up air wacky flapping arms men you see out front of stores or car dealerships sometimes. It was taking a step and flailing its torso around, then taking another step and flapping around. Very unnatural movements. When it walked by the vehicle, it was considerably taller than my Explorer. It was leaning forward like a person who used a walker, but even leaning, it was still a foot or so taller. My Explorer was 67 according to internet, so this would have made it almost 7 tall leaning forward. It had 2 very thick legs and a very thick torso, but I didn't see any hair or clothing, nothing but solid black or dark brown. I couldn't make out any details other than that. When the red taillights lit it up as it was behind the vehicle, I could see between both legs, but the legs were solid, so not translucent, as it blocked out the lights, so it had to have been solid. Anyways, I drove off down the road and saw my coworker had pulled off into a gravel parking lot, an in-dot parking lot to be exact, so I pulled up next to him, and he's asking if I saw it and how it didn't have a head. I said I was going back to look for whatever it is because, obviously, it's something strange. We end up heading back the way we came, and I was in front, and as we got back to the same general area, I saw a large black dog laying in the middle of the road. Now, for a dog, it is a lot bigger than any normal dog I've seen. But it's just lying in the road and looks like it's dead. So the first thing I assume is that's what was walking on the road. Maybe it got hit by a car, and it was flopping around. It looks like a large black German Shepherd type dog, but it has really thick puffy fur like a chow dog has. I get out to go see what it is, and the dog raises its head up and looks back at me and growls. A really low grumble growl. Its eyes are reflecting the headlights, so it looks like they're glowing yellowish. So I stopped about 15 or so feet away from this dog, and it started trying to stand up, but it sort of hobbled a bit, then stood up directly on its back legs and looked at me. Standing up like a person, not how a normal dog would appear to be standing up, but how a person normally would. It had to have been around 6 tall. I'm 6 feet 3 inches, and it was almost my height, I would guess. It stood there for just a second or two and then got down on all fours and ran off the road to the trees, but I never actually saw it using its front legs. It had ears on top of its head and a normal dog-looking face. It didn't have stereotypical hands like werewolves or other Dogman depictions. It had all the features of just being a very tall black dog that could stand up on its back legs. It wasn't a bear. I can tell the difference. Bears also don't have pointed dog ears. We also don't have bears in Indiana, supposedly, but we also don't have upright walking canines either, so. The area it ran to is a deer preserve, and it has about an 8 or 9 fence that goes around the whole area. I don't know where it went, but it disappeared once it got out of the headlights. By this point, my coworker gets out of his car, and I walk back towards him, and we are both liking what is going on. I happen to glance down, and standing between us is a normal-looking field mouse. It's also on its hind legs and using its front legs to clean itself. It looks all wet, and it hasn't been raining or snowing outside, so I wasn't sure how it was wet other than it cleaning itself. I tried to nudge it with my shoe, and it didn't care. It just stayed there, wiping itself. We leave. I get home and look up weird walking dogs. I draw a picture and post it up in a forum, and someone says I must have come across a Michigan Dogman. I had never heard of that before. I knew werewolves and stuff from movies and stuff but never heard of Dogman. I went back to work a few nights later and tried to tell my coworker about what I found, and the rest of the guys started laughing at me. So he gets pissed off and basically threatens me to shut up about it, or he will just deny it happened. So I just stopped talking about it and never really told anyone else for almost 15 years. I told my wife or a couple close friends, but I don't even think they really believe it, and I struggle to believe it myself. Logical reasoning would say it was a hurt dog, it was playing with this mouse and got hit by a car, broke its front legs, and was hobbling around because it couldn't use them. That's why the mouse was wet and traumatized, because the dog was messing with it. That is all fine, and that is what I have accepted for so many years, except that the first thing walking on the road was so much bigger than the dog. I can explain everything else away except that. I am a natural skeptic, and this has impacted me for years because, as much as I don't want to admit it, I honestly don't believe it was anything logical. There were no drugs, nothing mind-altering, it wasn't a bear, and all the typical and logical explanations do not add up. I was visiting for my grandmother's funeral in Denmark exactly 10 years ago. My cousin and I decided to book individual hotel rooms at the Comfort Inn off of I-40 in Jackson. We arrived back at the hotel late that night from our other cousin's house in Denmark. Probably between 2 and 3 a.m. we parked on the backside of the building. With the interstate directly in front, about a mile or so, the backside was completely desolate. Mid-wasted vegetative prairie with tall pines directly behind. As soon as I stepped out of the vehicle, I witnessed what at first I thought to be a wild hog digging about 60 to 70 yards directly in the prairie land. And then my eyes believed it to be human digging. I could not exactly make out what it was, and I felt like I had become entranced. Not fearful, not worried. It was just an abnormal sense to make out what I was observing through my eyes and through my mind. Whatever it was then looked towards us both with big bulging eyes, 100% visible in the night. Eyes looked to be the size of a basketball. It would look toward us and then continue doing whatever it was doing. My cousin and I both lost track of time and the amount of time we spent viewing whatever this was. It then got up and walked away as a 100% visible human being into the prairie land and eventual forest. My cousin and I both talk about this every so often and try to figure out what it was that we saw. To this day, we own land in nearby Denmark but have never heard of any superlative or paranormal eyewitness accounts. Is anyone familiar with this area? Starting roughly 19 years ago, I'm 38 now, I was in the woods behind one of my friend's houses camping. We were maybe only 500 to 550 yards away from the house and only took a few steps in the direction of the house to see it on the other side of the cornfield that was used for hay that year. We had a fire started, and we were just hanging out, talking, and enjoying the summer night. We had gone to Lake Michigan earlier, and a girl we met who lived near us decided to come with us and hang out, as our one friend knew her somewhat from his job. We all agreed she would get the tent, and we would all sleep around the fire. After an hour or so, we had an amazingly bright light shine down right over us. We all kind of wigged and got up, but then a strong wind came down on us and the light slowly moved away. We all decided it was the police helicopter looking for marijuana plants and saw our heat plus the fire on the thermal camera. We all laid back down, and within maybe 10 minutes, we would all be back to each other, hearts racing. As we lay there was an ear-spitting screech. Before any of us could get up, something with considerable weight hit the leaf-lined forest floor. Now, all of us standing, a creature that seemed no larger than a wolf ran, not walked, multiple times around us before we could get a bead on its location. The girl, forgot her name, now she was in the tent doorway, and two of my friends had almost teleported into the tent, they moved so fast in fear. At this point, the creature had stopped moving, but we still couldn't pinpoint where it had stopped. The only view we could get was that it had gray and white fur, not patterned but with random patches. It moved more like a person on all fours, but way faster than even a wolf on a dead run. We also realized that the helicopter we figured was the dope scope was still nearby. Not far, but we could see stars being blocked out by it moving from west to east, almost like it was strafing. Another 10 adrenaline-filled minutes passed, and we assumed it had left. After another hour of lying there listening and waiting for its return, we all started falling asleep. In the morning, nothing in the campsite was disturbed, and nothing was damaged. I walked back to the house to get some eggs and other things for breakfast. Nothing felt off except for the constant feeling of being watched from the woods, but after that long night, I could understand it. On the way back, though, at a different angle of view, I noticed 3 distinct areas in the hay that were pressed down in an almost perfect triangle. Once I got closer, there was a static feeling in the air, and all my arm hairs stood up. As I got closer to the woods, a strong feeling to turn around hit me like a ton of bricks. Across the field, around 250 yards away, there is a piece of wood that splits the two fields. In that narrow strip of trees stood a cross between a dog and a great ape, about 6 to 7 feet tall on 2 legs. It seemed, I'd say, uncomfortable being on 2 legs as it swayed side to side like it was unbalanced. I turned back and headed to the campsite and made breakfast, saying nothing to the rest, as heading back to the house would have us going right by the creature. Roughly 3 hours later, we headed to the house, and there were no sightings or off feelings. The next sighting was about 4 years later, while hunting family property about 4 miles from the original sighting. Sitting in the woods by myself that evening, I had a group of 4 come in. Now I would sit in the thicker woods, but I had a 270 sighted in at 100 yards. I had 3 lanes that were optimal for that rifle, but 2 years ago I got a hard shot on a buck only 75 yards away and threaded a needle with the bullet, so I was very comfortable with any shot. Anyway, they were calm and moving, slowly feeding with no care in the world. After several minutes, the largest doe kept checking behind them, hearing something, but I could not. They suddenly jumped all at the same time and even crashed into trees trying to get away. I still heard nothing and couldn't see anything in the direction she kept looking. Slowly, I noticed a gray and white-haired creature moving in down like a canine hunting. When I got the first good look, I immediately recognized it. This time, though, I didn't have any anxiety, no racing heart, and felt completely calm, unlike the first encounter. It was not because I had my rifle. The first encounter, I had my shotgun that I carried to and from the house. It moved through the woods and almost seemed to be avoiding me, but it also had the feeling that I was there. It walked behind the denser underbrush and would almost leap through the shooting lanes I had so as to try and stay hidden and not give me a shot. Not that I was going to, as I have a strong belief that cryptids and paranormal interactions should be viewed and felt with strong actions as a last resort option. It only made a very low growl, as it would have been entering the field about 75 yards from me. I waited around 30 minutes before heading in for the night, as the creature moving through would have kept anything from coming in. As I walked back, I never felt the need to rush or even look behind me. Coming into the small grass field we let grow over on the property, there once again was a rush of wind and a dark object in the sky, which I could see better this time as a triangular-shaped object but had rounded out sides like a triangle that was filled and the sides were about to burst. It moved slowly in the direction the creature moved and then quickly disappeared in the opposite direction, extremely quickly. The last time I had an interaction with the same creature was only 3 years ago, but now it is 50 to 55 miles to the south. I was hunting in the Allegan State Game area only a few days into the firearm season. Anyone who knows that area during deer season knows that it is filled with hunters from all over. I usually would go to the more difficult areas as the city people wanted to hunt 10 feet from their vehicles and not have to work for their deer. I was deep in the woods by the Swan Creek area, and the sun was just starting to get up to be able to break through the dense trees. I am used to the weird and sometimes unsettling feeling that area gives you, but today felt weird. I hadn't seen any other cars on my way to the area, so I felt good about a successful hunt. As the minutes went by, I could hear a few deer moving in, and I was hoping a buck wouldn't be far behind. It was cooler this morning than the last few, and it was easy to see one's breath. I started seeing the breath from behind some berry shrubs that I believed to be the deer I had heard, and I was excited to see them move through. After 10 minutes went by and the breathing kept coming from the same spot, I started thinking maybe there was a buck behind the shrubs and he could smell me or know something was up. Then they all booked it through the opening by the shrubs and went full speed through the woods. Shortly behind them was a sight I forgot about, and this time it had my heart almost exploding and my anxiety at its maximum. Without any threat towards me, at least at the moment, my fight or flight was at a red level, and I was panicking about what to do. I'm around 1,000 yards in dense woods with many hollows and ridges to get to my vehicle, and there is nobody hunting with me to try and get to me. Being in the zone I was in, I had my shotgun, but with what I have seen in the past, I wasn't too sure I was safe even with it. I traveled roughly 150 miles, staying relatively slowly so as not to make noise. As I waited by a tree, listening and looking behind me, the woods were dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels running about, and no wind. Some would think this is great because you can hear everything, but those who spend time in the woods know that when an apex animal moves in, either the warning calls go off or it goes silent in the woods. I kept moving at a faster pace and kept checking my phone for better service to call my in-laws to head out to my area for assistance. I was maybe 200 yards from my vehicle, and I saw what I thought was my true end. On a small mound, about 75 yards ahead, stood a creature on all fours. But this one was different. The hair was brown and black and looked to be bigger, and this time the front half was fully visible, and I could see that it was the same kind of beast I've seen each time before. Half wolf, half great ape, and I thought this thing was the test tube baby of some mad scientist. It stared directly at me for about 5 minutes, and I was sure the other was somewhere close, watching from behind. Then a huge gust of air came through the trees, and the creature ran as if it were being hunted by itself. I leaned against the tree by myself, sighed, and felt a huge relief wash over me, almost like a shower of protection. I opened my eyes and looked up, feeling like I would see the same thing as before, but there were clouds and an open sky. Then the clouds seemed to distort and morph. Kind of like when glass has a curve or defect and it distorts your view of objects behind it. I know it was another craft flying above the trees, and it was either a different one altogether or a different mechanism to hide being it was daylight this time. Now comes the really fun part. For about 2 years after, I had almost ghost-like visits from these creatures. That is really the only way to explain it. They both would show up in my woods while collecting firewood or on a walk with my kids. Now I never got the same feelings I did the other times. I felt like it was a memory playing in my head, except they moved and did things I didn't physically see them do. One day I had my dog with me, which I trained to protect my kids and wife at the time. He even tried to attack me when my ex took him into the woods on a leash. I put on a new hoodie and pulled the hood over my face. He came after me, and even calling his name didn't calm him just when he was close enough to smell me, so I know he catches everything around him. He was not on a leash this day, and not even 10 feet and his hair raised, and he started growling, but he seemed confused as to why himself. Then I saw both beasts about 20 feet ahead. I could see through them, and they moved as if made of smoke. My dog lunged at one and went right through it, dissipating like mist thinning in the morning sun. The other walked behind a tree and never came out of the other side. It's been a few years now, and I haven't seen the creatures fully, but I keep getting shadows at the edge of my view that look like them, and they keep getting close on both sides each time. I have the biggest problem with how can what was a full physical interaction with what I figured was a cryptid or maybe otherworld being now be more paranormal/spirit interaction that seems like a soul following me? Could they have died and I am the one they didn't get, or are they projecting to me like a calling? Either way, after holding it in for years and keeping the other 2 encounters from the couple people I still talk to from the original group, I finally figured I'd put the encounters and instances out there and let others give their feelings and takes on it. None of it has interfered with my life other than a few close heart attacks from anxiety or the couple sleepless nights right after the encounters.